Morning, everybody. Great to be with you this morning. Thanks you for joining us. I don't want to take up a lot of time because I know that Celeste, Greg, and Lisa have a great program set up for you this morning. So normally when we have these events, I take a little bit of time to catch you up in AGS and to always reaffirm our commitment to the work that you're doing. So I thought it's been a couple of years since we've been able to get together, 4 years now that we've been able to get together in person. And every time that we are together in person, we have our teacher fellows in New York. The leadership of AGS is very, very interested to meet with you and look for every opportunity they can. And since we haven't had that chance, I thought it might be nice to have Dr. Christopher Tucker, who is the chairman of AGS, give you a few words today. I just want to tell you, Chris is responsible for pretty much the entire direction of AGS, and we're doing a lot of things. We do a lot of honors programs, we've got scholarly work. There's a lot of programs and initiatives AGS undertakes. But I have to say, in almost every conversation I ever have with him, the foremost thing on his mind is the APHG teachers. He really, I truly believe that if anybody at AGS thinks this, Chris knows how important this program is, how important your work is, and how AGS needs to be front and center in our support of what you do. So I think that nobody could be a better cheerleader for you guys than Chris Tucker. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you this morning. Chris?
Thanks, John. I really appreciate the kind introduction. As a son of a teacher, somebody who took a number of APs and then in high school, and as somebody who later on found out that after I went to school, they created AP Human Geography, in my absence, and I missed this entire life experience. I'm someone who is extremely enthusiastic about what it is that you do and the contributions that you make to our nation. Albeit through your individual communities, the most important thing you can do is shape young minds of our future citizens. So thank you so much for what you do with AP Human Geography. We as a society are proud to, orient all of our resources, our time and our energy around bolstering your community, providing resources to you. We've been very fortunate this year with the addition of Courtney to our team to focus, provide laser focus to your well-being, your success, and the success of your students by providing a range of different resources and activities. So, if you haven't met Courtney, please reach out to her. She's just done wonderful things for us. She and the rest of the team here have worked very hard to put together a program today that gives you a little bit of a taste into what we have done this week with Geography 2050. For those of you who are unaware, this was our 8th year of conducting a Geography 2050 symposium. And I always like to describe it as a multi-year strategic dialogue about the vital trends that will reshape the geography of our planet over the coming decades. In previous years, we've covered all sorts of important topics like sustainability and urbanization and, mobility and energy. And this year we decided to focus on how can we create a more equal future for all of us. In many ways, if you don't think geographically, you really can't help all of us deal with the creation of a more equitable future. You can't help chip away at the inequities that we have in our society because without thinking geographically, you can't understand those patterns that are happening beyond your own personal experience, beyond your own line of sight, somewhere over the horizon, whether it's the community next door or somewhere all the way across the world. Without understanding all these geographic patterns of things that drive geographic change and understanding the underlying human geography, we can't help support our leaders, support our business leaders, support our political leaders in eliminating those underlying structures that manifest differently in different geographies and different communities in order to create and forge a more equal future. So thanks so much for joining us today. We think we have some wonderful speakers for you. We'll introduce some really great resources and hopefully build some community that all of you can rely on going forward. Not only is this a really important topic, but all those topics we have before, we actually have those resources, those discussions, those panels, those lightning talks available for you, whether it's related to oceans or related again to, previous year's topics. Thanks for participating in today's topic. We hope that it will help shape your curriculum, shape how you teach. And then from there forward, hopefully we can provide you our past, present, and future resources that help you do your job. So thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to supporting you off into the future. Take care.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, John and Chris. Really appreciate those remarks from you. Before we jump into the lightning talks, I just wanted to give a quick note to you all that we will be having a drawing today as part of the session. We've been lucky enough to acquire 4 sets of reproductions of maps from the world's first atlas, which was published originally in 1606, and we'll be giving away 4 of those sets today. So please make sure you stick around to the end of the session. We'll be having a drawing for those, and you must be present to win. So appreciate your staying for the whole time on that. And then finally, just wanted to run through the agenda for the session as well. Thank you again for the opening remarks. And we're going to also show you some opening remarks from Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II, followed by 4 lightning talks, 2 from our fantastic APHG teachers, Mr. Greg Hill and Mrs. Celeste Reynolds, as well as 2 lightning talks from the Geography 2050 Symposium that we thought were of particular interest and relevance for teachers. We'll then finish out the session with a few closing remarks from myself. I'm eager to give you more information about how you can receive support and resources from us. We'll do the map drawing and then we will close out for the day. So with that, we're going to introduce you to Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II. He is the president and senior lecturer of Repairers of the Breach and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Dr. Barber is also a bishop with the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, has many other titles and engagements, and is the author of 4 books. He's the architect of the moral movement, which began with weekly Moral Monday protests at the North Carolina General Assembly in 2013, and recently relaunched again online in August 2020 under the banner of the Poor People's Campaign. He has done incredible work across the country, and he recently gave a full-length hour-long keynote at our symposium that was premiered yesterday. So we'll make sure to share with you the link for his full talk if you're interested in hearing more. And with that, let's hear his opening remarks.
Let me also honor all of these geography teachers. I don't even want to think about a land without teachers. I come from a family of teachers. My father was a teacher. He taught physics. In fact, he loved geography as well. And my son was an environmental physicist. He went to the School of Math and Science, and now he's an environmental lawyer. Teachers, it used to be said in our community, teachers, pastors were the most precious of our community because they helped to train up our children and they ministered to our souls and helped to give us the kind of ethics that would help us make this world a better place. So wherever you are, wherever your particular geographical pinpoint is right now as you listen to this. I want to be among the many who are to celebrate you for all that you do. Challenge this society to take care of you, pay you more, honor you more. And I pray for even more of you, because if there's anything we need more of, is great teachers who are committed to teaching, educating, and training and building up and raising up great students. God bless you. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Wonderful. Thanks again to Dr. Barber for taking the time to share those wonderful remarks with us. Next, we're going to show you a lightning talk titled Infrastructural Racism from Mr. Greg Hill. He's an APHG teacher at Horn High School in Texas. And following the video, we will have the opportunity for live Q&A with Mr. Hill. It will be moderated by Dr. Lisa Benton-Short, who is the APHG Chief Reader. So throughout the talk, please make sure to note any questions that you might have, thoughts about how this topic relates to APHG, so you can participate in the live discussion following the lightning talk. All right. All right. Thank you for your patience.
Unit 6 of the AP Human Geography course and exam description, commonly known as a CED, introduces students to the world of urban geography. As countries in both the developed and developing worlds experience rising levels of urbanization, urban issues will continue to spill over into all facets of the CED. This exemplifies a concept I stress to my students to connect the dots. Connect as many of the other units in the CED to whatever unit we're currently covering. Geography at all levels has been compartmentalized, but as issues overlap, like climate change and urban land use, there exists a need for a crosstalk between the physical and human worlds, even within genres on the same side of the geography spectrum, like political and urban geography. In my work as a grad student and my work as a geography teacher, they lend ideas to each other like I never would have imagined, particularly when looking at Unit 6 of the CED. Topic 6.7 to topic 6.10 are just a few of the areas in the CED that overlap with my research. The focus of much of my main research is on the triangulation of displacement. This triangle consists of redlining, the introduction of the interstate highway system, and gentrification, with urban renewal resting in the middle. Looking at this triangulation through the lens of their orchestration by the U.S. federal government, as well as state and local agencies, I go further in looking at how these government policies have led to widespread displacement of African Americans primarily, as well as other social groups. It has been African Americans, though, that have suffered the most. I've dubbed this infrastructural racism, a part of the emerging Black geography genre of geography. Stepping back for a minute and focusing on one aspect of the triangle, I'd like to share some examples of tools I use to teach redlining maps, such as ArcGIS and the HOLC or redlining maps overlay, along with median household income and housing occupancy layers to have students make inferences and connections with the redlining maps to the current urban landscape. Another tool we like to use is Map Warper. We take the HOLC maps and overlay them onto OpenStreetMap to analyze them with tools like Open Historical Maps, where you can take historical maps and interact with them as you will in OpenStreetMaps. We introduced Open Historical Maps in the spring while using OpenStreetMap throughout the year. One other tool students really find interesting is the Housing Precarity Risk Model from Cal Berkeley. Students can see how their neighborhoods could be potentially affected by some of the urban challenges we discover. The interstate highway system is another point on the displacement triangle. The 1950s Interstate Highway Act surgically destroyed many communities and has led to decades of places of cultural significance for African Americans to lose their cultural characteristics. Destruction of through African American, Latino, and even poor white neighborhoods like New Orleans' Tree neighborhood, as I-10 destroyed Claiborne Avenue, which was the center of black business and the center of much of New Orleans' jazz scene. At others like the 10th Street section of Dallas that was not only bisected by Interstate 35, but is now in the crosshairs of developers. So a couple of conclusions. First of all, there needs to be further research into where do the displaced end up. Much of has been said about the process of gentrification or the process of redlining, but where do these people end up? Further research needs to take place. There needs to be community investment as well as community involvement in many of these ventures. The Biden administration's committing to righting the wrong is a step in the right direction.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Greg, for that amazing presentation. We'll now ask you as well as Dr. Benton-Short to join us live for an extended conversation on this topic.
So hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Benton-Short, and I'm just delighted to be here today with all of you amazing teachers taking time out of your Saturday mornings to learn more geography. And a big thanks to Greg for such a both a timely lightning talk, but also I was really struck by how some of what Greg is talking about is historical geography, and but pulled up into the 21st century, so we can still see the impacts of things like redlining that, of course, are today illegal, but were common practice many decades ago in terms of assessing risk in land use and mortgage lending practices. So it's really great to be able to think about ways that some of what we're learning and what we've learned throughout the week at this conference makes a direct and impactful connection to the kinds of things that I know that you're eager to share with your students. So Greg, I want to start us off the Q&A session. So I get to ask the first question. And
Right.
What would be great is if you guys have any questions, you can either put them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask the question. So Greg, my question is to you. The work that you're doing, especially looking at that notion of infrastructural racism, how has it changed the way you think about that concept of gentrification?
Well, first of all, Lisa, it's an honor to be on the same panel with my urban geography mentor, Lisa Benton-Short. Thank you to John, Chris, and the board at AGS for having me. So it's truly an honor to be here, along with my partner in crime, Celeste Reynolds. So it's really an honor to be here. But how has that changed my view in terms of looking at gentrification? For a long time, as long as a lot of my AP Human Geography colleagues, we looked at gentrification as, the area gets bad, the poor people leave, the poor people can't pay the taxes, rich people come in, they build up, the city builds better stuff, the poor people move out, the end. Or it's simply like in looking at grading or rating or scoring several AP essays at the AP reading, that really was a lightning bulb moment, and seeing how students were responding to issues of urban decline, of gentrification. So that really informed my thinking and my teaching. And I had to change how I looked at gentrification in a sense that not only do we look at what's going on in that space that's being gentrified, but we also need to look at the people that are being displaced. Where are they going? Because I think that's part of the equation that's being left out. Where are the people that are leaving? We even when I go to Cincinnati and study everybody's favorite Over the Rhine, and talk to the people that are there and some of the people that have been there for years, and have been displaced. You hear where am I going to go? And I keep tabs with a few of them, and some of them moved even out of state. But I think that's one of the missing pieces is where do the people go? Which is one of the things that is driving my research.
Terrific. Thanks for that. I think you make a really interesting point about we don't have a whole lot of data on where the displaced go, or at least we haven't been thinking about maybe mapping that, putting that spatial component together. And that is certainly something that will be really interesting to see whether you can find some of that data that's not just anecdotal, but actually allows you to kind of see where people are displaced to. I think that's great. So I think Shmel, you might have a question?
Yeah, you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, my name is Shmuel Yerushalmi, and I'm a social activist from Israel. And I want to ask you next question. How, according to your opinion, will look well-being of populations in undeveloped and poor states of Africa, Latin America, Asia, and other poor states? Because according to my opinion, this most important subject we need to discuss in terms of geography teaching and research.
Shmuel, if you could type your question, I want to make sure I understand it correctly, but I heard something about African and Latin American cities, correct?
Yeah. I asked you about well-being of populations in Africa, Latin America, and ASEAN poor countries.
So
If-
Africa, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say thank you so much for your question, Shmuel. If you could
That's
also,
my question.
okay, if you could also type it in the chat. You were cutting in and out a bit, so everyone can know what you asked. That would be really helpful. Thank you. Sorry, Greg. Go ahead with what you were about to say.
Well, I mean, I hope I'm understanding. Please type it in, and if I'm butchering your question, please correct me if I'm wrong. But I heard something to the effect of about populations in African, Latin American, and Asian cities. If that's correct, and I'm gonna just tackle it in a broad sense in terms of urbanization. And I guess I could take it piecemeal one by one because they're all three different situations. With speaking in Africa, you have a very young population. You have very strong crude birth rates in those cities. So you have a lot of young people that are going to be needed to be educated, so on and so forth. So a lot of those nations are building the infrastructure in their education, such as Ghana, Morocco, to name a few, which I had the chance to visit. But in terms of Latin America, that's a totally different, I don't want to say can of worm, but a totally different laboratory to study urbanization, in that their dynamics are totally different in the sense that not only do you have climatic factors, you have things such as political stability that affects their urban issues. Whether it be Colombia, whether it be Chile, whether it be Brazil. Okay, here's your question. He says, there is now, oh, this is Lisa. I'm sorry, I thought it was this question. And Lisa's right. There is some good research starting on the underlying causes of urban redevelopment and gentrification in the global South. A lot of the resources I've been able to come across figure prominently on China, the cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and in terms of Latin America, Brazil is one that's, I don't want to say sticks out like a sore thumb, but there's a lot of scholarship uh, on Brazil. And Rio, with the coming of the Olympics, there was a lot of gentrification. And sadly, a lot of the infrastructure that they built for the Olympics is, for example, one of the soccer stadiums is now a bus parking lot. They park their city buses there. So you had people that were displaced for a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months, and it's increased the amount of not only displacement but inequality. His question was, how, according to you, will be the situation with well-being of majority of the population in poor countries around the world? In terms of economic development, that's a great question, and it's a pretty broad question. My guess is, and this is what I teach my students, is a good barometer to gauge how a country is gonna be in the future is how well it treats its women. And I tell my students to hang their hat on this saying that I always say is, the way a country's women go is the way a country will go. And as more and more countries are starting to realize that they have to put more into girls' education, particularly K through 8 at least, and also into women in STEM, protecting women in terms of domestic abuse and healthcare. Those are really going to be the ways that will increase the well-being of population in poor countries. That's a great question. I hope I answered that.
Okay, do we have any more questions from you all? Because I can always ask questions. Okay, so I see Susan. Hi, Susan. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us today. Greg, Susan asks, are these urban issues contributing to suburbanization, or where do you see the displaced people going? That's a great question.
And that is a great question, Susan. And actually, in some regards, there's kind of these counter flows, in the sense that there's this rush for people to come in, the place to be is what I call it. And so, coming back into the city, the urban core, where all the gentrification is occurring, is displacing their people. And we'll use Silicon Valley, the Bay Area is a great example if you want to use this with your students, because that's an area in which the displaced are going to the suburbs. And the suburbs are coming to the urban core. And there was a great talk by a gentleman. He did the one, if you can go back and watch it, on urban inequality based on cyclescapes. I think it's the title of his book. And he highlights that, what I'm talking about, in terms of a city in which the poor, the displaced are being pushed out. Even in Cincinnati, that's occurring, where in the urban core, in not just over the Rhine, but in the area around the University of Cincinnati, people are being pushed out to the outer edges, and that's causing cities in the suburbs to kind of rethink things like public housing, public health, and other things. And I hope I answered that. I don't want to. I'm trying not to hog all the time here. So.
No, I think you did, Greg. That was terrific. I think the one thing is, I know that there's been some really interesting recent research that is looking at how many of the inner ring suburbs are experiencing higher rates of poverty. And that is partly because as the core is, the center city is becoming more attractive, and land values are going up, and we are seeing displacement, some of the less affordable housing is actually in those early suburbs, the suburbs from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, right? Not the big McMansions on the Boomberg periphery, but the inner ring suburbs. And we're seeing oftentimes that there might be, in a single family home, more than one family, as a way to make that affordable. So there is some really interesting work that's showing that while the center of the city might be getting income growth, that actually the inner ring suburbs are seeing swift increases in poverty. So it is, but we still don't know if those are the displaced people, right? But this is kind of interesting. So Greg, there's one more question. Hi, Megan, from Megan Walsh. Hi, Megan. And she says she lives in the North Denver suburbs, and she's definitely seeing that kind of displacement into those inner ring suburbs. So I kind of think that's really interesting. Megan, did you want to have a follow-up at all to that, to your observation?
I wasn't
I was-
really kind of adding a comment on that piece, but I did have a question that I typed in a couple chats earlier.
You did.
Oh,
So,
I
I see it. So Megan asks, you have thoughts on how you can research tracking displaced people, how it could or should be done? Could we use census data? But that's locked in for so long, so it's hard to use in real time. So how are you thinking about looking at displacement, and what kind of data might you gather, Greg?
That's a great question, Megan. One of the ways that I plan on doing research on that, yes, census data, it's you know, especially, and I'm gonna say it, I don't even care. This last census was politicized, so you kind of have to kind of gauge the validity of the data. We'll see when all of that comes out. One of the things I plan on doing is actually doing case studies. Have 3 specific cities that I'm going to focus on. And I hope to track several households over time. That's a daunting task. A lot of my, I've talked to several people. It's like, man, that's a big task, but I think that's the work that needs to be done. I think that's the missing link in looking in that, not in the sense of because I want to see where the people go in terms of how as we can as a society help these people. We tend to and a lot of the research is geared towards the market forces. It's the market forces. But I went to a seminar here in Dallas over new urbanism, which was the hot topic of a couple of years ago. And there was a guy, he's a developer, and he had kind of this nonchalant response about the displaced. He's like, well, why should I care, what happens to those people? Why should I care that a particular area changes its cultural landscape changes? That's part of it. We're just here to make money. And that really kind of, a lot of people gasp in shock at that. So those are some, some of the ways in building relationships with people, in talking to government officials, whether it be urban planners, the city planners of a particular one of the 3 cities I want to use as a case study, and build those relationships and kind of help see, because you can see where look at where cities are placing their public housing dollars, because that's also a barometer I want to look at as well, and where that public housing stock is being placed. Thank you, Megan, for that. I hope I answered your question, because I can talk all day about urban geography.
Well, Greg, you and I share a passion for cities, and we can talk all day about what's going on in cities around the world. So I'm going to wrap up if we don't have, because I want to make sure we have time for all of our different lightning talks today. But I know you've got us thinking a lot, Greg, and even just thinking about how to introduce, the historic consequences of redlining has impacts today on continued segregation, on areas that are now gentrifying. It not only links directly, obviously, to Unit 6 in our cities, but it also links to using maps in Unit 1 and ways that we can interpret and use data. And then it also links very strongly to Unit 7 on economic development. So there's all sorts of ways that, as you're thinking about maybe making some time for talking about this subject, that I think you can make those cross-unit links, which are so important to think about. So I'm going to turn it back over to Courtney. Courtney, come on back.
Yes, thank you so much, Greg and Lisa. That was a fantastic discussion. And for everyone in the room who wants to think and learn more about this, there are so many sessions from Geography 2050 that really focused on urban spaces, redlining, access to housing. So definitely encourage you to check out that video vault. And I shared a link to that in the chat. Next, we are going to view a lightning talk titled, Does Skill Make Us Human? Migrant Workers in 21st Century Qatar and Beyond. So with that, I will go ahead and share my screen again. We'll get this video going.
Does skill make us human? Is skill another word for freedom? What are the political consequences of defining some people as skilled and some people as unskilled? My book explores these questions by looking at the experience of migrant workers in Qatar's booming construction industry in the lead up to the 2022 World Cup. We think of skill as an objective measure of ability, but in Qatar, the political classification of workers as unskilled was used to limit their freedom, to narrow their political rights, and even to deny them access to imagination and desire. Ultimately, the label unskilled was used to cast doubt on the full political personhood of workers and to call into question their capacity for, and therefore their right to, freedom. I started this project shortly after Qatar was awarded the 2022 FIFA World Cup hosting rights. Qatar began the massive construction required for the Games almost immediately, funneling hundreds of billions of dollars to reinvent itself as a global destination for sports and culture. This drew a lot of scrutiny from human rights and labor organizations to the working conditions of the migrants building those buildings. Reports documented an array of labor abuses, from wage theft to abysmal living conditions in labor camps to injury and death. The international press ran headlines about World Cup slaves. Much of the coverage attributed the extreme labor violations to the legal framework called the kafala system, which legally bound all migrant workers to their employers. But all foreign workers were covered by the same rules, regardless of wage, occupation, or national origin. Certainly professionals, doctors, executive, hotel managers, etc., were not experiencing the same kinds of labor violations. So what was producing the extreme exploitation that construction workers faced? I began a multi-year project that included research in 5 countries in 8 languages. I interviewed a broad array of actors, from government to industry leaders to workers, and I spent hundreds of hours on Qatari construction sites shadowing workers. Qatari construction is at the global cutting edge. Anyone who has seen the remarkable renderings and now photos of the World Cup stadia can see how ambitious and innovative the projects are. What's less visible is how incredibly complex and challenging these buildings are to build. They require extremely advanced construction technology and very advanced construction skill. But the migrants recruited arrive with minimal construction experience, if any. So companies have to invest heavily in training their workforces. Every aspect of every process on the project site is designed to promote on-the-job learning. The construction sites function as vast training systems through which thousands and thousands of men develop specialized construction skill. Companies live and die based on how well they are able to train their workers. But when I asked the managers and supervisors about their workers, they all described them as unskilled. They described their master scaffolders, their expert welders, their precision cladders, and many others as unskilled, unproductive, and poor quality. It became clear to me that skill meant something other than ability. Managers and supervisors were referring to a political category. Unskilled was a subordinate political status through which those migrants described as unskilled were dehumanized and described as not having the full capacity for freedom. Their exploitation was made to seem inconsequential and unavoidable. As I began examining skill not as a measure of ability, but rather as a political category, it became clear to me how the politics of skill shaped all aspects of social and political life in Qatar. The book examines these facets one by one, from law to urban planning to climate change. In the conclusion, I point to the way that the politics of skill, which are so visible in Qatar, also structure many other national and transnational contexts.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for watching that talk with us. And I'm now going to open up again for discussion and pass things over to to anyone who has thoughts or questions. And, Dr. Benton-Short, if you have thoughts as well about how this connects to APHG, would love to hear those.
Thanks, Courtney. Well, it was really interesting, and I've already ordered that book from Dr. Iskender. It's another, like much of what we teach in AP Human Geography, we are crossing units and connecting constantly back. And here we have a great, her talk about kind of some of what she was finding in her research really was linking that population part of our curriculum in terms of migration and push and pull factors, but also kind of crossing over into the political unit and even how policies and certainly the idea of categories of migration are socially constructed. I think this, like showing your students or maybe having them read some excerpt from Dr. Eiskender's book would be really interesting, because I think what she's really doing here is getting us to think about the nuances of how we categorize migrants. And that is so politicized, especially, right now in the United States. So it makes me wonder, do you guys see potential for talking to your students about the more nuanced ideas around labeling different kinds of migrants as skilled or unskilled? And, does something like watching this video make you think a little bit more about how you might tease or work with your students to understand more of the nuances and how they might link across some of the other units like the political unit? And so I'm just going to throw that out there. So, what do you think about the label of unskilled versus skilled after listening to Dr. Eskander? Yeah, Shelby, I think it's very interesting, isn't it? We tend to think about, the impacts of migration policy and how, contentious it is in the United States, to realize that other countries maybe are also struggling and not always treating some of their immigrant workers very well is very eye-opening. Looking for opportunities. I mean, how do you guys introduce that concept of skilled or unskilled status when you're teaching around migration? I'm really curious to hear and how you might be able to integrate even just some of the ideas that came out of her work to look more, to kind of really interrogate that idea of skilled and unskilled.
I would probably take it down to literacy. And that's how I would have described skilled or unskilled is basic literacy levels from their home state. So not comparing, somebody who wouldn't speak English in an English speaking country, but looking at their literacy skill from their current country.
Yeah, that certainly is one way we could kind of better understand why some of these labels are really misleading, right? If you're just assuming a level of literacy. And Susan, you mentioned, okay, so you're saying, we talked about migration, about the abandoned migrant workers in Southwest Asia due to the pandemic. Employers downsized and workers lost income and housing immediately and had no money to return home. And so many experienced homelessness. Yeah, that is another great way of kind of working in the politics around migration, right? So linking the political unit to the demographic unit. And, people are moving around and oftentimes they're getting stuck in places. One of the really interesting things is if you were to, I thought there was a really interesting essay. I'll have to look it up again. I'm sorry, I can't remember the title, but it was looking at the cruise ship industry and how many of the crew who were predominantly from Southwest Asia, places like the Philippines, but also in Southeast Asia, were just stuck on cruise ships for months during the pandemic because, while the cruise ships worked really hard to get their passengers home, they didn't necessarily want to pay that exorbitant price to charter airplanes to get their crews home. So they pretty much left the crew to get themselves home. And of course, after a point in time when air traffic was shut down, that was basically became even more difficult. Does anybody else have any ideas about how you could think about skilled versus unskilled? Like we've got literacy. What other some of the big other ways that we might distinguish between skilled and unskilled? I'm thinking the cultural unit, perhaps, right? Other kinds of ways that we might distinguish or assume a level of skilled or unskilled could certainly be race, ethnicity, even religion. Those are maybe ways that we see differences between each other. And so maybe it's easier to then label and assume a certain level of background and skill based on some of those. Let's see. Oh, Samantha says, my class looks at the site that the US that has the US visa types and how someone can get sponsored and apply in the US on our annual quotas for each type. Yeah, that's another great way of looking at all the different categories we have, because we just, oftentimes I think, you know, when you're introducing migration to students, you know, you've got the big idea of migration, but then to think about the different categories by which people enter countries with different types of visas is really an important way to really stimulate discussion. And I think in the case of the United States, you could take a look at what is the H-1B visa program versus family reunification versus some of the other categories by which people can apply. So that's a great way. Thanks for sharing that. And Melody, I see you say, I take my students through applying to New Zealand for a resident visa, and they realize their own skills or the parents' jobs wouldn't get them into New Zealand. So they get the idea that skills have different values in different places. Oh, that's terrific. Yes. And I think that was the whole big point of Dr. Iskander's work, is to see that, but to see the devastating consequences that it has, and to see that kind of level of ways in which countries will classify certain types of skills as being highly desirable. There was a time when Canadian policy for those who wanted, this was in the late 1990s when Hong Kong was moving from British administration back to being part of China formally. And, you know, many Hong Kong Chinese were very concerned that they would, you know, lose their ability to practice market capitalism, and so one of the things that I know about Canada was, for a while there, you were considered a priority for admission into Canada if you had $400,000 or more in a Canadian bank. So, you know, when we think about, you know, how countries set quotas or set opportunities for people to migrate, sometimes it is just as crass as money. And Megan, yes, you bring up the point about gender. Absolutely. I think you're absolutely correct that typically female immigrant roles in the economy are considered unskilled, right? We're thinking about domestic work, we're thinking about hospitality work, or home care and child rearing. Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, interrogating those and you know, seeing some of the limitations of putting those classifications. I get, you know, in Washington, D.C., for example, I have been driven by taxi drivers that have engineering degrees, but they're just, you know, for whatever reason, unemployed at the moment. And so driving a taxi or an Uber or a Lyft. And so sometimes you can't necessarily it's really important to nuance that even if someone is in a quote unquote unskilled position, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a background that would qualify them for other types of jobs. It's just perhaps, you know, in the United States, for example, if you don't have a medical degree from a recognized university that the United States will recognize, you know, they're not going to recognize your medical status as a doctor that could practice, for example. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I think, you know, you guys have got some great ideas and ways that you're introducing the idea of migration and equity, particularly, you know, challenging your students to really see that a lot of countries are not necessarily treating migrants with equitable policies. And so to make that political unit connection is a really strong one. And last opportunity to wrap up, does anybody have any other way that, or any activity that they do that they want to mention, or put a link in there? Even if you've got some great stuff in the AP Human Geography teachers page in those Google Docs, if you want to give us a link to any of the activities you do, I'm sure everybody would enjoy sharing some of that opportunity. Yeah. All right. So Courtney, do we want to move on to Celeste Reynolds and her lightning talk?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lisa. We will jump right into watching the next video.
Maps give us a lot of information about a place and the people living there. In the past 20 years, there has been a surge of participatory mapping initiatives around the world, and one of them is OpenStreetMap. Several years ago, I was attending the AGS conference as a teacher fellow where I learned about OpenStreetMap. As I learned more about how OSM mapping projects could be used to solve real-world problems while developing my students' skills where they can apply content learned in the classroom to helping others, I knew I had to introduce my students to the world of OSM.
Fortunately, I was one of the students who learned about OSM in the AP Human Geography classroom when we were learning about refugees in Syria. After learning about the difficult life refugees face in camps, Mrs. Reynolds showed us how OSM could help the refugees, and we began to map the next day in class. We continued to do mapping projects like that all year, as well as other mapping projects, such as a mapathon, and it was really cool how what we were learning in class, we were able to do mapping that would help improve the lives of the people we were learning about, like the Syrian refugees. We students saw the benefits of participatory mapping and making a positive impact using OSM. During my sophomore and junior year, the pandemic prevented me, as well as my classmates, from participating in any service learning. This is when we remembered doing mapping in our AP Human Geography class during our freshman year, and how we were able to help others from our computers. We asked Mrs. Reynolds to help us organize regular mapathons where we could map together. Our school partnered with another school in Mesquite, Texas, and we began to Zoom with each other mapping projects that needed volunteer mappers. This launched a new initiative called OSM Teen Maptivists, a student organization for high school students to learn about OSM and how they can help others through mapping.
Each month, Teen Maptivists host map-alongs or mapathons for high school students to join. Map-alongs provide students an opportunity to hear from professionals who use OSM in their line of work and begin to understand how OSM helps others. In addition, students are shown how to sign up for an account and given basic instructions on how to map.
OSM allows students to see the inequities of the world through missing data and how vulnerable people are if their community is not mapped. Maps tell people where things are located, rivers, mountains, deserts, as well as where people live. However, when things are not mapped, then we are not informed about the people or the land in this area. What I learned the most is that when people are not mapped, they become susceptible to natural disasters, war, disease, and hunger. If others do not know there are people living in a location, they cannot be included in decisions that might help protect them or provide them with resources that could help them survive. So mapping is important because those who are not mapped are defenseless and at an automatic disadvantage.
Participatory mapping is a starting point to include everyone in important decisions that impact their community. However, we also want all students to have access to participate to help others in their community. Introducing high school students to mapping in OSM allows them to see how they can be included in the mapping process, which ultimately reveals their voices in the map.
If all students can participate in a local community mapping project, they can help influence what is seen on the map and influence decisions made in that region. Having a diverse group of individuals from a community, such as women, youth, and impoverished individuals who tend to be excluded from the mapping process, helps to make maps that represent everyone. Building an inclusive community of mappers, as well as those who need their communities mapped, is a goal to help build stronger communities.
After 5 map-alongs, Teen Maptivists has had over 100 mappers and educators from 11 different states in Canada. Teen Maptivists' goals is to encourage more students to get involved and start a chapter at their high school. This year, the American Geographical Society is offering GeoBoost grants to encourage students and teachers to start a chapter at their school.
We want to create a strong network of high school mappers who believe that in a click of a button, they can make a positive change in the world for all global citizens. If you are a teacher or student, please visit our website and join us for our next event. And for all the geography professionals out there, we would love for you to join us as a guest mapper at one of our events. Team Maptivists hope to build better and stronger communities that are inclusive and equitable for all, because we are all in this together. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Celeste, and also to your student for that amazing talk. We'll now pass things over to you and Lisa to continue the discussion live.
Wow, Celeste, I just want to thank both you and Greg. You both have been pioneers and leading the effort among APHG teachers to really understand the power of being able to actually map. You know, we don't necessarily, the exam's not going to test a student on how to map, but the power of mapping some of these important communities is certainly something that helps reinforce all of the other units in AP Human Geography. So I want to start with something that I know a lot of people aren't quite as clear about as we need, and that is, Celeste, tell us, how is OSM or OpenStreetMap, how is that different from just using Google Maps or using software like ArcGIS? I mean, what is the value of OSM that maybe we don't understand as well as we need to?
Well, first of all, thank you, everyone. And thank you, American Geographical Society. And yes, Greg and I are working together to try to encourage more AP Human Geography teachers to try it, because we have been trying it in our classrooms, and we really have seen kind of being able to take what we're teaching about the curriculum and put it into action, which is creating very valuable learning experiences for our students that are going beyond our classrooms. And I think that that's what we want, you know, try to push geography beyond this AP Human Geography course and create more geographers and geography decisions, geographic decisions and perspectives and decisions that are being made. So, so thank you, everyone. But yes, OpenStreetMapping is open source data. And so what that means is that many people can contribute to this data. It's open to anyone, and the information is available to anyone. The difference between Google Maps is a commercial map. So Google creates those that map data, and it's going to only be updated when Google updates it. So it's very possible that an area or a place can be outdated because Google hasn't updated in 5 or 6 years. So that's kind of, and Google also will pay. Well, they'll charge for their data. And that's sort of why OpenStreetMapping was created, because the founder wanted information so he could build some maps. And they said, well, we're going to charge you. And he's like, why should I? Wait a minute, I can get this data on my own. So that's how he built OpenStreetMapping from that. ArcGIS is a tool to make maps. And so you're saying, well, you're saying OpenStreetMapping, you're making maps too. But so there's a difference between consuming maps and producing maps. And ArcGIS uses many, if you listen to Jack's talk, he was talking about all the databases that Esri uses to be able, that you can extract from to make maps on any topic or any issue that you would like to look at spatially. So actually, OpenStreetMapping is a form of data that Esri uses to, in that data, it's one of part of their many databases that they're using that people can extract from to make maps so that people can consume those maps. So you need to have that data, and that's what OpenStreetMapping does. It allows you to build that data so that you can eventually go and create a map so that you can consume it. So it's a process that's very, it's bigger than the person. It requires, a lot of people say, oh, it's just drawing boxes or drawing lines, and it feels like I'm never going to get this done. But it actually, if you're doing it, I'm doing it, you can make about 3,000 edits in an hour if you have a group of people that can really start making a difference. And so that you can begin to make a map, then you can begin to see what's happening in that space, and then you can start making decisions. And I think that that's kind of where people need to kind of see the importance of OpenStreetMapping.
Terrific, Celeste, thanks. So some of what you're doing when you're doing the mapathons include things like marking buildings and roads and other kinds of infrastructure. How do you think that will help some of the communities, especially those communities that maybe aren't mapped? Why is mapping them important, and what are the students actually doing when they're contributing to the Open Street Map through a mapathon?
Well, think of it this way. If an area is not mapped or the information is not up to date, and let's say there's a natural disaster, whether it's a hurricane, tornado, a tsunami, what happens is that if you have an old map, it might not reflect how many people are actually living there or how many businesses are actually there. And so what happens is that the people like the Red Cross who need to go in, they need to know how many people are we going to have to serve? How much resources are we going to need right now? They need it in today. And you think about there was one in Iraq where they had an earthquake, and it was in a rural area and it hadn't been mapped. And so this earthquake happens, they kind of know, oh, there's a town over there, but it hadn't been mapped. They had no idea how many people did they need to send medicine for. They didn't know how many people had been impacted by that earthquake. And I think it's one of those things where you have to help students connect. There are a lot of populations that are not mapped, and if they're not mapped, what are the consequences of them not to be mapped? What are the worst case scenarios? And I live on Cape Cod, so we're always prone to hurricanes and lately tornadoes, which that's due, thank you, to climate change. But I always say to my students living on Cape Cod, we have to have evacuation routes. We have to have things in place that if a hurricane was coming, how do we get off the Cape, which is really 2 bridges. But it's really a very important, like, is our community resilient to natural disasters? And is everything mapped up to date so that we, our officials and the people that are making the decisions on if we need to evacuate have a good plan and a systematic plan that will ensure that everybody gets off the Cape safely and everybody is going to be okay. So I bring it to a local level, talking about scale, and then I try to apply it to other case studies. So the students can kind of see, wow, this data is important to keep up to date. This data is something that is relevant and it can have an impact on me if it's not up to date. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it does. It does. So I'm going to ask you one last question, and then we'll make sure we have time to hear from anybody else that wants to ask you a question. So I noticed that some of the map-alongs that you guys were doing were around refugee communities. What other AP Human Geography units could you do some open street mapping to make those reinforcements and those connections beyond, say, the cultural unit or the demographic unit?
That's a great question. So refugees, why I have a lot of refugees on there was sort of, it's early in the unit, and that's kind of how I hook my students into it, because it is for them, it's very interesting to them, and then they become, how can we help? It's kind of that natural student, inquiry, like, Mrs. Reynolds, what can we do to help? As I move on, if you move into the political unit, I have done American Geographical Society and Teach OSM partnered a little competition that maybe some teachers have done, where you're looking at your own community and saying, is all our government agencies in your local community mapped? Do they have the metadata, which is like the address, the phone number, emails, hours? And so that people have access to those government agencies. And so we talk about that kind of brings up a dialogue of where is town hall located, and what are they responsible for, what offices are in there. And so it starts to have the students start to think on a local level about government. I also do resiliency mapping, which you can look at. And I think that goes right into the urban unit of kind of looking at urban sprawl, like if you have a lot of urban sprawl, is that being kept up to date? Roadways, things like that. We also, the other thing was during the pandemic, there is an app on people's phones that they can download called Health Sites. And you can download it, but it's also providing information during the pandemic. Where can people go to a pharmacy? What time is that pharmacy opened? What's their phone number? What's the website? Do they have a nurse practitioner there? Do they offer the COVID testing? And so students were able to map that in real time. And that's kind of like thinking about your urban areas. What's the infrastructure like? How well are they meeting the demands of that population in their infrastructure? And then you look at, in the urban unit, talking about urban sustainability. And we did this last year in the American Geographical Society. We talked about the Kiribati Islands and rising, climate change and rising sea levels and what's that doing to their community. And I think that, that was really neat for my students to see that and to be able to map and realize, okay, well, now here we're talking about climate change. We're talking about sea levels. We're talking about how that is impacting the people in this urban area. But then how is that impacting their government, which I thought that goes back to the political geography of, okay, we might not be able to have everybody stay on this island. We're going to have to look at other countries to see if they'll take some of our citizens and allow them to become citizens in another country. And how are we going to encourage people to move to those countries? And then that goes into migration. Do they want to leave? Will their culture be erased? Will they lose their culture? It kind of goes back to that culture unit. So it's a domino effect that creates, that kind of enhances that learning and kind of say, yes, this is important to map. And yes, because it has this, and this consequences, and this is how we're helping. So I think that there's a lot of ways that, you're hitting multiple units in those types of mapping projects. And they lead to discussions. For example, I did one in rural America. I originally come from Illinois. And so I use my hometown as a kind of an example all the time, talking about rural America and agriculture, as well as transportation and, cultural landscape like grain elevators, which my students have no clue what a grain elevator is. And we actually, we were talking about food deserts in urban areas, but then I started talking about, can urban areas be the only place where there's food deserts? And I said, what about Mount Pulaski? And they said, oh, it doesn't have a grocery store, Mrs. Reynolds, you said that. And I said, so there's food deserts in rural America. And so one of my students, it was really fascinating. One of my students said, well, is Mount Pulaski mapped in OpenStreetMapping? And it wasn't. And they said, Mrs. Reynolds, we need to map it. It makes it vulnerable to tornadoes. And because they had learned about Mount Pulaski through my teaching, through all the different units, it started making them inquisitive about whether it was mapped in OpenStreetMapping. And so now we have we've been mapping, and it came up into urban geography, talking about energy sources and the windmills. There's a lot of windmill farms out there, and where, infrastructure, when we talk about economic development, talking about how we're going to build more energy and where is that going to happen and how is that happening and how is that changing the landscape of America. So, here on the East Coast, we're seeing it happening when windmill farms are happening in the ocean. But I'm saying, well, it's also happening in my ocean. I call the cornfields and the soybean fields my ocean, out in the cornfields. And so you're having windmill farms, and it's changing that cultural landscape. So I think it's, there's a lot of ways to connect it to the CED in a very natural way, and create and have the kids be able to connect it as well. And I think that's the important thing, is that so much, I introduce it, I kind of show it, I keep introducing it, but eventually the students will start connecting. And that's what I want them to do, for them to do the connecting, and not so much me doing it for them.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Samantha, you noted in the chat that, a big thanks to Greg and Celeste, absolutely, for kind of leading this effort through AGS and the kind of map-alongs that they've been doing. I know that both Greg and Celeste will continue to do these Mappy hours. So all you teachers are certainly welcome to come and learn how you might in turn train a little bit and get comfortable enough with OSM to do some of those really exciting mapping projects. And Samantha mentions that she does hot OSM projects in conjunction with civic engagement projects. And what she likes about hot OSM is that it gives concise descriptions of why that area is requesting mapping. And what we really is always surprising to anybody when you talk to them, it is that, there's large, vast areas of the United States that aren't mapped. We think we are a mapped society. We think, that we know the maps and the contours of the continents and the shapes, and we know where our political lines are drawn. But in fact, many communities are missing information, even in urban areas. And so it's a really great way to introduce that idea that maps and what is actually geographically on the ground in places is a continual process of change that needs to be updated. One of the things I'll just ask Greg and Celeste to do is, Greg, if you want to come back on for kind of the last idea here, is what are you two doing to kind of help other teachers learn? Are there some good links that might get some of these teachers here today who aren't familiar with OSM getting them started, and where should they turn to first?
Well, so there's many ways for you to learn more about OpenStreetMapping. And I know a lot of teachers, they're learning a lot of technology and they're worried to introduce OpenStreetMapping because they're worried that the students will know more than they do, or the students will make a mistake or things like that. And that's why we're offering Team Maptivists that if a teacher doesn't know how to use OpenStreetMap, you can come to the map-alongs on Monday nights and have your students come, and we'll walk you through that training, getting you started. TeachOSM also offers teacher map-alongs on Tuesday evenings, every Tuesday. And Stephen Johnson, who teaches with Lisa at George Washington University, he's a professor that teaches OpenStreetMapping, and he is a great resource that he can help you, show you basic things. He can teach you how to create your own project. He can help you connect it to the CED. He can get you more confident, and you can join in anytime you want during that hour, and he can help walk you through step by step. So there's a reinforcement for teachers as well, where you can ask the questions, and then as you work with your students, you can build it as well. And then there's also the TeachOSM website, has some basic lesson plans on how to start, how to map, kind of shows you tutorials. They also have some great lesson plans to kind of show you maybe how you can incorporate it into your classroom. If you don't feel like you have the time in your classroom, that's why we created Team Maptivists, so that you can include OpenStreetMapping with your students while they're going through it, maybe as extra credit, or maybe you see that month is hitting a theme that you would like to talk about in class, so you can send your students that evening saying, you have homework tonight. You're to go to the map-along, and you're going to hear this guest speaker from the American Red Cross that is using it in such and such, and you're going to be mapping. And you can start to integrate it that where you're not necessarily having to do OpenStreetMapping in the classroom, but it can be used to enhance the classroom discussion the next day. So we're trying to offer those things. There's a lot of opportunities, and we also have a website as well, Team Maptivists. I think it's in the chat as well. So there's a lot of places, TeachOSM, and they're really very helpful to get you started and to help you learn about OpenStreetMapping and how to use it. And there's the OpenStreetMapping US community as well.
Well, thank you both so much. I think that you've really shown us that there's a lot of social justice potential, not only in things like better understanding gentrification or better, discussing things around, categories of migration, or in this case, mapping communities, and in really empowering communities to map themselves. I think that is a huge way that we really move on issues of social equity. And so I want to thank both you and Greg for the work that you're doing in AP Human Geography. And I want to thank you all for thinking about how equity is such an important concept within AP Human Geography. And we can see it, that those kind of conversations that we can have with our students around equity issues are across all of the units in AP Human Geography in powerful ways. So I'm gonna turn it back over to Courtney because I think we have a drawing to do. You know, I just want to really thank you all because the kind of work that you're doing in AP Human Geography, it's not just about the exam that happens in May. It's about getting students excited to be and understand how geography can be such a powerful tool to really solve some of our most pressing issues around climate change and urban redevelopment that may be displacing people, and communities like in refugee camps that are maybe not they may be overlooked or not as more vulnerable than other communities. And so I think it's just terrific, and I'm so proud of the work that you guys are doing and the way that you're contributing to geography and to your students. It's just really wonderful to see. And so I'll just leave it with that. And Courtney, I'll turn it back over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa, and to our amazing guest speakers, Greg Hill and Celeste Reynolds, and to everyone in this room who's been so wonderful at engaging and participating and asking questions. We recognize it's a Saturday, and yet you still showed up for your students, for your profession, and for each other, and that just means the world. I am the daughter of 2 public school teachers, so I am no stranger to how much work you all have to do just to keep your classrooms running. And so it blows me away and just inspires me so much that you showed up here today and are really amazing contributors to your profession. So with that, I'm extremely pleased to announce the results of our drawing. And I will be following up. I have your email addresses from the Eventbrite, so don't worry, I'll be following up to get your addresses if you are one of the winners. Our first winner is Shelby Nelson, so congratulations to Shelby. Our second winner is Jerry Kinlaw. Our third winner is Marcia Weaver. And our fourth winner is Megan Walsh. So congratulations. We'll be sending those maps to you to share with your students in your classroom. And really just want to thank you for being here. I know I'm standing between many of you and lunch or breakfast and the rest of your weekend. So I just want to make a few last comments. First of all, mentioned earlier in the session was the APHG GeoBoost program, and I just wanted to share a little bit more information about that. You may have seen, if you're part of the APHG Facebook group, our many announcements about this program, and we were just so delighted and pleased by all of the amazing applications we received this year. So we're really excited to announce that in 2021, we have given out 78 GeoBoost grants to APHG teachers across the country of $300 each. And these are to fund activities, resources, field trips within your classrooms. And so if you haven't applied for GeoBoost this year, don't worry, because actually, thanks to the amazing applications that we received this year, we're very excited to announce as well that next year we'll be able to greatly expand the number of awards once again. So please keep an eye out for that opportunity and do apply for that funding next year. Last year, we gave out 30 awards, this year 78, and next year it will be even more. So thank you to everyone who helped make this program possible. In addition, we typically have our Geography 2050 Symposium in person. Of course, last year and this year, we've done it virtually because of COVID, and it also allows us a lot more flexibility in terms of getting speakers and people who can attend by having a virtual conference. We're still considering our options for next year, But if we are in person again, we will bring back our APHG Teacher Fellows program, where we bring about 50 teachers to our symposium in New York. You're able to attend all of the sessions in person, and we have, again, special sessions just for the teachers for you to connect and share ideas as well. So we're very much hoping and excited to try and bring that program back next year. And I know many of you on this call are previous teacher fellows as well. And then finally, I just wanted to bring your attention to the fact that we offer a really amazing variety of videos and different curriculum resources for APHG teachers. One of the highlights is a series we just released this fall featuring Dr. Benton-Short and Parag Khanna. They focus on each of the units and offer some really interesting perspectives on those. So I'll be sending all these links to you, but please do continue to engage with us. You all have my email address, so very excited to hear from you and continue serving you in whatever ways possible. With that, I will wrap things up. Thank everyone once again, and hope you all have a wonderful weekend and a great Thanksgiving holiday.